you remember your first experience with a video game that ran in widescreen mode? For most people, it was probably on the 7th generation of consoles, such as the Xbox 360 or PlayStation 3. At the Xbox 360 reveal keynote at E3 in 2005, Peter Moore announced that every game would be 16:9 widescreen as standard.
Every Xbox 360 will be designed for high-definition widescreen television and will support 16:9 aspect ratio to expand the storytelling canvas.
Back then, the Xbox 360 was leading the charge with the push into the HD era. During the mid-2000s, TV stations were also converting 4:3 aspect ratio to 16:9. These days, just about every system and game supports 16:9 as standard. If we go back and look at the 6th generation, the original Xbox, the Sony Playstation 2, and the Nintendo GameCube all supported 16:9 widescreen in various ways. All three consoles had 16:9 widescreen options in their respective dashboard or settings menu. The original Xbox managed widescreen the best due to its powerful CPU and DirectX capable GPU and made it easy to add this feature. However, many games still opted to omit 16:9 widescreen due to the additional performance implications with an additional 33% of processing power for GPU rendering. The split is somewhere probably down the middle. Around half of the original Xbox games supported widescreen mode. The Sony PlayStation 2 and the Nintendo GameCube also supported widescreen modes, but I never got to experience widescreen gaming on these consoles until much later. Back in those days, my only option was a CRT for gaming. But 16:9 HD gaming was looming and HD TVs were starting to become more and more affordable to the average consumer. Homebrew developers took advantage of widescreen where they could too, for example, in the very excellent media player Xbox Media Center. But did you know that the 5th generation of home console, and I'm talking about the Sony Playstation, the Nintendo 64, and the Sega Saturn, also had games that ran in widescreen mode, and I'm talking 16:9 aspect ratio widescreen mode back in those days. Now I know what you're thinking, how is this even possible considering the fact that this was the mid-90s and all three of these game consoles only supported a standard definition TV signal, which is not something that widescreen aspect ratios are even supported on. But to answer that question, there was a method that was utilized back in those days that allowed developers to actually bake in 16:9 aspect ratio widescreen mode into some of their games. So let's check out and see how it was done. So to be clear, there is no way you could ever do true widescreen on the 5th generation consoles, since none of them are capable of outputting an HD signal. But 16:9 can still be achieved by a method that was very popular in film known as anamorphic widescreen. Anamorphic widescreen is where a 16:9 scene is reduced to 4:3 that a standard definition TV supports. But if you have an HD TV, you can then use your TV settings to stretch the image back out to 16:9. This same approach was used in select video games back in the 90s, and somehow this completely passed me by as something that I never even knew that existed back then. But first up, let's take a look at the Sony PlayStation. There are around 50 titles that support 16:9 anamorphic widescreen. I did a quick scan of my collection and had 5 games that support widescreen mode, so let's go ahead and check them out. Bloody Roar 2 is a 3D fighting game that was released in 1999 by HUDSON Soft. In order to enable the widescreen mode, in the options menu you can change the display type from normal to wide 1. Incidentally, there's 3 different widescreen settings. To me, I couldn't tell the difference, so I just stuck with the default wide 1 setting. Now when you play the game, you'll notice that the 4:3 image is reduced, but changing the monitor's aspect ratio to full or stretch will display this game in all its 16:9 glory. Pretty cool for a fighting game of this era. The popular EA Sports baseball franchise Triple Play also has widescreen support. Now in the options menu, you can toggle between normal and widescreen with the added bonus of showing you in real time what the change looks like.
Leading off for the San Diego Padres, Kilvio Veras.
He really got a lot of good wood on that ball. That was a good piece of hitting for a double.
Foul ball.
Driving games were quite a popular genre to have anamorphic widescreen options. VRALLY 2, also by EA, released in 1999, is one such game. Just like Triple Play, you can play in normal 4:3 aspect ratio, but switching over to 16:9 and stretching the horizontal width will give you the full widescreen experience.
Fast right, long. Fast right, very long.
PORSCHE Challenge is another game that has this effect too. Although some games were better than others, some of the HUD elements on PORSCHE Challenge, like the speedometer on the bottom right, have not been adjusted at all to compensate, and this game may give the impression that it's only been stretched. But if you look at the 4:3 aspect ratio comparison of both games, it's clear that this is true anamorphic widescreen at play here. But the PlayStation wasn't the only console at the time to support 16:9 anamorphic widescreen. In fact, the Sega Saturn was experimenting with widescreen and was the first to release games a few years before the PlayStation, with the most popular game undoubtedly being Nights into Dreams. And then there's PANZER DRAGOON 2 by Sega. This game came out in 1996 and also has a widescreen option, and let me tell you, it looks magnificent in widescreen on an HD TV with an upscaler such as a FrameMeister or an OSSC. Widescreen driving games were also available on the Sega Saturn. High Velocity Mountain Racing Challenge was released by Atlas and Cave in 1995 and supports anamorphic widescreen very well. And of course we have the Nintendo 64. Released in the USA in late 1996, there are around 20 titles that support anamorphic widescreen, with legendary developer Rare being responsible for many of them. Titles such as BANJO TOOIE, GoldenEye, Jet Force Gemini, and Perfect Dark all have options for widescreen 16:9. The Nintendo 64 was the console where I remember seeing these options, but it was always something that I could never experience back in the day, and to be honest I totally forgot about them. But here's a taste of what they look like in 2018. So we talked about the 5th generation of home console that had anamorphic widescreen built into some of their games, but we can even go back further and take a look at the earliest examples of anamorphic widescreen in console games to the Sega Genesis. The Sega Genesis is a part of the 4th generation of console and was released in 1989 in North America. And believe it or not, there is one game, World Cup USA 94, that coincided with the Soccer World Cup of the same year, has an anamorphic 16:9 widescreen mode. It's nested in the options menu with a screen icon that can be switched from 32 to 40, but this is proper widescreen even with the HUD elements scaling correctly. Now, I'm not 100% certain on this, but World Cup USA 94 must be the first ever 16:9 anamorphic widescreen game ever released on a console. If anyone knows of something potentially that came out before this, please let me know in the comments below. And finally, another game that came out before the 5th generation of consoles was Virtua Fighter for the 32X. This game was released in North America in 1993. The display option known as Squeeze will provide a 16:9 anamorphic display for all the 3D in the game. Sega has always been an innovator, and with bringing widescreen gaming well before the PlayStation and Nintendo 64 consoles were available is truly fascinating, especially considering that most of us would not get a taste of widescreen gaming until 12 or 13 years later when HD TVs began to replace CRTs in the household. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed this look at widescreen gaming on retro systems. This was obviously something that skipped past a lot of people back in the day, myself included. You know, I had no idea that many of these games even had widescreen modes at all until I went into the menus and saw that there was a widescreen option, which kind of blew my mind, to be honest with you, because I lived console gaming in the 90s. And this was never something that was on my radar for whatever reason. I guess a lot of people would have missed out on this for the same reasons, because none of us had a widescreen, TV or display back in those days. It wasn't really until, at least for me, the mid-2000s when the Xbox 360 came around was when I got my first kind of HD TV. So this was definitely eye-opening for me. And guys, I hope it was for you as well. And let me know what you thought about this video in the comments below. I'm going to leave it at that. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye for now. That's how you drink coffee.